Hello everyone and welcome back to the first video on F1 Fantasy for the 2024 F1 season. Oh, I'm so excited to get back into this. It's been a long, hard winter. I'm so excited for F1 just in general, and just F1 Fantasy this season is going to be beautiful. There's a lot more variation to the start of this season than I think there is last year. And if you want to skip and jump to parts of the videos, I will have all of the main talking points bookmarked throughout the video. So if you only want to see the team selections or maybe like drivers not to look out for, you can go straight to those areas. But before we get into the actual video, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow my Twitter for more F1 Fantasy news, because I do put little notes on. Say for instance someone gets a penalty and it's not big enough to make a whole video about, I will just make a post on Twitter. Again, I've also got a Discord where I talk about F1 Fantasy in it. I'll put a link down below, and of course join my league. At the end of this video I'll be talking about something interesting that I'm doing with my league, so make sure you stick around to see what that is. First off, we're going to start with drivers you want to avoid, going from biggest value down to lowest value. So without further ado, we start with Mr. Lando Norris. Now, McLaren, I'm going to get onto them in general. However, after testing, McLaren looked okay. They look like they're going to be jostling with Mercedes for that 3rd/4th fastest car. However, F1 Fantasy have put a massive price hike on the McLaren boys this season, because obviously last season they were way undervalued because they got good halfway through the season. But Lando Norris at 23 million is way too expensive. Do not go anywhere near him, considering there are so much better options for like even around 4 or 5 million cheaper. So go nowhere near Lando Norris. He is on the no-touch list. Then we go down to his teammate Oscar Piastri. Same sort of reason as Norris, however this time he's not as expensive. He's only 19 million, which is one of the lower prices for like the big value drivers. However, when you have Leclerc only 0.1 million more valued, Sainz 500,000 less, Russell 0.2 million less, and Lewis Hamilton only 0.3 million more, I just don't see the point in going for Oscar Piastri. I can't stress enough, McLaren didn't have that good of a testing. I doubt they're going to be podium contenders for the first few races. Then we move on to Lance Stroll. Again, it's very risky to go for an Aston Martin driver at the minute because they might actually be slower than Visa Cash App, and I very much doubt that they're going to be battling Mercedes, even McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull. So then having Stroll at 10 million, or 10.7 to be precise, very expensive for what I think Aston Martin are going to be giving for you this year. Alonso, he's a whole different situation because it is Fernando Alonso, but someone like Lance Stroll, don't think it's going to be a good season for him, and he's just not worth the price in that Aston Martin at the minute. Then we move on to both Alpine drivers, who by far are the worst picks at the minute. They are valued both at 7.8 million. Steer clear of them like they're the bloody plague. I tell you what, I'm so happy about this. And no, I don't hate the French. It's not about that. It's purely because in my predictions video, I said Alpine at 8th, and I thought that was quite crazy of me. I now think I might have been too generous. They really look like they have a shitter of a car. And at 7.8 million, there's cheaper drivers who are better value for points. And there's the Visa Cash App boys who are only 0.2 million more for Yuki and 1.2 million more for Ricardo. So there's really no point in going for the Alpine driver. Car looks terrible and they're too expensive. Then we get on to both Haas drivers. Now, again, that's why I started with the highest value to the lowest value, because both Haas drivers, they're not the greatest of options. However, I would say if it's one of those times where, you know, you're just trying to fit in Verstappen or just trying to fit in another big value driver and you've only got enough money for a 6.2 Magnussen or a 6.4 Hulkenberg, then it's fully understandable. However, they wouldn't be my first choices for the lower end cost drivers. So again, be cautious if picking Haas, because they do look like they'll be the slowest going into Bahrain. And then, of course, we have Logan Sargent. Similar to the Haas's, he's only 5.5 million, very much the cheapest driver. So he is dirt cheap. Again, if you can only fit him in, go for him. However, when Bottas is 0.9 more, Zhou is 1.1 million more, and even his teammate Albon is 1.5 million more, I just think Albon compared to Sargent is worth that 1.5 million gap, probably even more. So I would steer clear of Logan Sargent for now. Then moving on to drivers you want to keep an eye on. We'll start again with top value drivers down to the bottom. Of course, you knew I was going to bring him up. It would be Max Verstappen. Now, Max Verstappen this season is a very interesting option because he's very expensive. Very, very expensive. He is 30 million on the dot, which is fucking insane. It's actually more than Red Bull as the constructor in general, which I think is it's mental. I don't know how they've pulled that off, considering constructors give you the most points. So I don't see how Verstappen's higher than Red Bull. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent. Very good driver to have, of course. You want to be able to fit him in your team. Verstappen is the driver everyone's going to be going for. But just be careful, because he can ruin your team because of how expensive he is. However, aiming to get him after a few price increases, if you get your teams right, would be very smart. Then moving on to Sergio Perez, a massive drop in price, almost 10 million. It's 9.2 million down to Perez, 20.8 million he is valued at. I think this is the best pick for right now in the season. We always know Perez starts the season off pretty decently. Remember correctly, there was actually 1 point between Perez and Verstappen at 1 point during last season. Yeah, last season, where Verstappen was about 300 points clear of the rest of the grid. That's because at the start of the season, he always tends to be at his best. And that's why I think it's so crucial to get Perez in now. This is the best time to have him. Red Bull are so dominant, even if he doesn't beat Verstappen, guaranteed second place, guaranteed podium at least. And I genuinely think there is no way he fucks it up unless he has a crash or anything, because that Red Bull just looks so dominant, and it could be even worse than it was last year. And yes, he did manage to screw it up multiple times last season, but I can't keep saying enough. He's decent at the start of the season. He's so much cheaper than Verstappen. So I think he's a very solid choice. Then we move on to Lewis Hamilton, 19.3 million. Very good option. Risky on the Mercedes option. He wouldn't be my top choice. However, still a very good driver to go for at 19.3 million. Considering it's Lewis Hamilton, that is very cheap. Then we move on to Charles Leclerc, who I believe is the second best option to bring in your team. Ferrari look very good. I haven't spoken about them yet. They look like definitely the second fastest team on the grid at the minute. So Charles Leclerc at 19.1 million is a bloody bargain. I tell you what, he's going to bag you loads of points in Bahrain unless Ferrari it up. So yeah, keep an eye on Leclerc because I think he'll be very crucial to this F1 Fantasy season. And I would love to have him in my team. I might be having him in my team, but I'll talk about that later when I talk about team selections. Then we move on to Carlos Sainz. Again, he is the cheapest option of the big boy drivers, 18.5 million. Like I said about Charles Leclerc, Ferrari look quick. He will be getting in the top 5 in Bahrain this first race coming up. So it is a bloody bargain to have him in that Ferrari at 18.5 million. He is a worse option than Leclerc, of course. I think Leclerc is the better driver out of the two. But if you just can't afford Leclerc and you want a Ferrari driver, Sainz is not a bad option at all. Then we move down to both the Visa Cash App boys. My God, Visa Cash App look decent. I think everyone's overhyping them a little bit. I still think they'll be around Aston Martin's pace. But funnily enough, I can make the comparison of last season's Alpine to where Visa Cash App will be, I think, this season. And you know, last season, Ocon and Gasly had quite a few decent race results. I think that's where they're going to be this season. So they're not bad options to have, especially at 9 million for Ricciardo and 8 million for Yuki. I do think Yuki's the better option because Yuki actually looked very good last season. And Ricciardo 1 million extra. I can't really see where that 1 million's coming into play because I think Yuki will actually outperform Ricciardo this season. But both of them very good options for how cheap they are. They are the best two cheap drivers on the grid because Visa Cash App will be around the top 10. Lower end definitely, or around 11th or 12th. So very much keep an eye on them. Then we move on to Alex Albon, around 7 million this year. Williams don't look too good, but it's a similar thing to Fernando Alonso where just put Albon in that Williams. We've seen what he can do. He will pull off masterclasses that will get you quite a few points. Then we move on to both Kick Sauber drivers, which is Zhou and Bottas. And again, bar the Visa Cash App boys, because yes, they're still a little bit expensive. With me saying they're probably around mid-pricing. With the lowest costing drivers, these two are the best. I really believe Kick Sauber, they're not going to be amazing this season, but they will be better than the Williams, the Haas, and the Alpine. So for 6.4 million and 6.6 million, they are very good options. I believe Bottas would be the better option again, just because he's cheaper than Zhou by 0.2 million. However, both of them will get you good points for the price. Definitely the best cheap options. Now, my final little category for this area is unsure drivers, and you have George Russell first up on this grid because he's not a bad option by any means. However, the drivers around him are much better. He's 18.8 million, and I do think if you've got Leclerc, Hamilton, or Sainz, which they're all within a million of each other's prices, Russell would probably be the worst option out of all of them. But when I say worst, he's still in a Mercedes, so he's still alright. That's why I'm very unsure of him as a pick. I personally wouldn't, but if someone did have him, I wouldn't be like, that's a terrible choice. It's just, I guess you could say it's a differential. Not many people are going to have him. And then you've got, of course, Fernando Alonso. I think his price is just a little too high for where the Aston Martin's going to be because he is 15.8 million at the start of this season. But it's Alonso, isn't it? Alonso could just pull something out of the bag because it's Fernando Alonso. So very much keep an eye on Alonso, purely for the reason that he could do anything. Even if he's given the worst car on the grid, I could still see him getting like 20 points for overtakes or just pulling a blinder in qualifying and getting like the top 5 or something. So now let's move on to the constructors. Now I'm just going to give you my top 3 constructors because constructors work a little bit differently to the drivers. I cannot stress this enough. In F1 Fantasy, constructors are key. And the best constructors you can choose for now would be, of course, Red Bull Racing, Perez and Verstappen. They're going to get you bags of points, which will get Red Bull bags of points. You're going to be probably getting around 70 to 100 points each race from them this season if they are this dominant. Again, Ferrari look like the second best option and as the cheapest out of the mid-big pack of Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari. It's a no-brainer to go for Ferrari here, even just to have saved money. If they were like third or fourth fastest car, I would have been like, gamble on Ferrari so you can push to get someone else as a driver. But yeah, for 19.1 million, Ferrari kind of is a steal. I don't really know what F1 Fantasy has done with the pricing for Ferrari because I really do think they're going to get price hiked pretty soon after Bahrain. I think all 3, Sainz, Leclerc and Ferrari, will get price hiked after Bahrain. So very much keep an eye on them. And then the final one is for the cheap option, which is Visa Cash App. Again, though, only because they're 8.5 million. Now, they'll probably get you more points than Aston Martin and definitely more than Alpine. Definitely more than Kick Williams and Haas. That's why they're the best cheap option. But with constructors, you just need to have the best constructors. I can't stress it enough. Honestly, having 2 good constructors is better than having Verstappen in your team. Yes, Verstappen gets to 2 times. He would probably get you around 80 points in a race. However, if you drop to someone like a Perez, he got you 30 points. You lose 20 points on the Verstappen. But dropping from Ferrari to, say, Visa Cash App is probably around a 30-point drop. So you're actually losing 10 points by not going for Ferrari. But I'll talk about this actually right now in my team selections. I'd also like to mention that any team that I have not talked about in the constructors either means they're too expensive, e.g. Mercedes or McLaren, or just not worth it, Aston Martin below basically. Let's talk about the team selections for Bahrain. And let's start with the first category, which I like to call the Ferrari category. And the first team actually will be the team I will be playing with for Bahrain. This team is as followed: Perez, Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, Alex Albon, and Valtteri Bottas with Red Bull and Ferrari. Now, for me, this probably is the strongest team. Yes, no Verstappen. I'm crying about it as well. However, I'm planning to bring in Verstappen once I get a few increases in the price, hopefully from the Visa Cash App boys, and then boom, and then I take out Perez, bring in Sargent for Ricciardo, because realistically I only need 0.8 million more for Verstappen. So with this team, I would sack off having Verstappen for Bahrain. However, I most likely will have Verstappen in the next up and coming races. But again, actually with the team, Sergio Perez, very solid option. He will get a podium in Bahrain if nothing like a crash or anything unexpected happens. Again, with Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, like I can't stress enough, Visa Cash App look very good this year. So for where they're valued, very good options. Again, Alex Albon, 7 million. I really just believe he's a great option to have in there. He'll probably get me around 8 to 12 points, which is perfect. And then Bottas, just because he's cheap. That means I have 1.6 million in the budget, but I really don't believe Alpine are better options than Bottas. That's why I've gone for him. And again, Red Bull and Ferrari are the main talking points of this team because most of my money is going on the constructors. Sadly, I don't think there's any teams like Aston Martin last season where they started off dirt cheap. The closest thing to that is Visa Cash App. However, they're not going to be podium contenders. They're going to be top 10 contenders. And I think as a constructor, you need to be something more. Then the second option for the Ferrari team is Sainz, Alonso, Sargent, Zhou and Bottas. And this basically is just dropping down to Sainz. Again, Ferrari will do very well, so it's not a bad option. You'll put your 2 times on Sainz. You'll have Alonso, because he's the only other driver you can afford to have for this team. However, Alonso, again, around 15, maybe 20 points if we're lucky with him. Very good though. And then Sargent, Zhou and Bottas, just because they're dirt cheap and the best options available with the money you'd have left. And of course, with Red Bull and Ferrari. And like I said before, the main points for this team are getting price increases so that potentially even in Saudi Arabia, you could bring in Verstappen over Perez, or maybe push it after Saudi Arabia because we know Perez is pretty decent in Saudi Arabia, and then go for Verstappen afterwards because you should have enough money. Then we move on to the second category, which of course is the Visa Cash App teams. So the constructors would be Red Bull and Visa Cash App. By no means a bad option because you can bring in your boy Verstappen. However, there's consequences to each of these teams. Now, the first one would be Verstappen, Albon, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, and Valtteri Bottas. So, basically, this team is what I was talking about. So, you move from Perez to Verstappen and Ferrari to Cash App. Now, by no means a bad team. Probably the best team you can get with Visa Cash App, purely because you got Red Bull and Verstappen, which is points on points. Of course, you put your 2 times on Verstappen. However, you suffer the consequence of having not the best second constructor. Now, the second option for this team, again, is actually not bringing in Verstappen, but bringing in 2 big value drivers. And I kind of like the idea of this, because you could have potentially 2 podium contender drivers. Yes, not first place, sadly, but Leclerc and Perez in the same team, with Ricciardo, Yuki and Bottas with Red Bull and Visa Cash App. Now, that would be very juicy, because Leclerc and Perez, I really do believe, would be a close fight between the opposite, which would be Verstappen and Albon. It's either one of those 2 teams you would choose with the Visa Cash App, and very equal on points, I believe, both those teams. I think I would risk it and go for the Leclerc and Perez, purely because if Verstappen doesn't win and be as dominant, then the first team would be worse. And, you know, risk it for a chocolate biscuit, innit? But those are the 2 teams for the Visa Cash App category. Then you have the third category, which I'm not really adamant on. However, if you do think Aston Martin are going to do okay, then this team could work for you, because again, you can have Verstappen in this team. So it's not actually a bad shout in general, because you have Verstappen, Albon, Yuki, Bottas and Zhou with Red Bull and Aston Martin. By no means a bad team, but not having Ricciardo in the team and also gambling on Aston Martin might be an issue, because Aston Martin might be battling with Visa Cash App anyway. So when Visa Cash App is that much cheaper, it probably is better just to go for them. And then I was going to do a 4th category for a non-Red Bull team. However, I cannot stress this enough, because I was doing the numbers and it just didn't seem worth it. If you drop down to a Mercedes and Ferrari constructor, yes, you could bring in Verstappen. Outrageous. However, I've said this about 10 times this video, constructors give you so many points. Mercedes will probably get around 40 to 50 points as a constructor. Red Bull, 80 to 100. That is around a 30 to a 50 point deduction in points, which is so many points. I just don't think it's worth not having Red Bull as a constructor. So I really just don't think it's even worth considering at the minute not having Red Bull in your team, because they're gonna be dominant. And if they aren't, then boom, we switch over, because there's so much money to be saved, and then potentially you can have a very good team without Red Bull. But for now, with all we know, you have to have Red Bull. I cannot stress that enough. Now, finally, to end off this section of the video, I'll talk about the chips. I very much adamantly believe you should not be using any chips in Bahrain. And for anyone who hasn't played F1 Fantasy before, you want to be using chips on realistically sprint race weekends, because there's more points up for grabs. So that means, for instance, the 3 times, if there's more points up for grabs, it will increase in value, because obviously 3 timesing 70 points instead of 40 points is a big difference. Same with Limitless. You want to have Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz all in one team when they can get you as many points as possible. But that about wraps up this section of the video. I will then quickly talk about my league. So I'll give the league link in the description, and the code on the screen right now. Now, for this season, I have something very exciting planned, which is a prize pool. And I will be doing a £200 prize pool for the top 5 in my league this season. Last year we had 126, so it will be hard to get into the top 5. However, if you get top 5, it will be £75 to first place, £50 to second place, £30 to third place, £25 to fourth place, and £20 to fifth place. Now, obviously, I think I'll have to do this over PayPal. I'll work that out towards the end of the season, and basically I will try to get in contact with whoever's in the top 5 at the end of the season, maybe over Twitter, or I might ask for Instagrams. I might ask for Instagrams drops in the comments, clearly showing that you are the person who I should be giving the money to. And I'll probably do that with just asking for a video just showing your F1 Fantasy account, showing your team, your points, so that it's definitely you who I'm giving it to. But yes, the league's going to be very interesting this season. I hope I see you all in there, and thank you all so much for watching. I can't stress how excited I am for this season of F1 Fantasy. It's good to be back, and hey, have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you all later for another F1 related video. Bye bye.